The morning began quietly in Montecito, California, with the Pacific sun just peeking over the horizon. Few outside knew that by 6:23 a.m., the very foundations of one royal family's carefully constructed life were about to quake. Buckingham Palace had released a 12-word sentence, terse, clinical, yet cataclysmic in its implications. Prince Harry is not the biological father of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. No qualifiers, no softening language, no hedging, just DNA, law, and irreversible consequence. Within minutes, this sentence would detonate the private world of a man who had spent years building his identity around fatherhood, collapsing the life he knew and shattering the image of a future heir as the world had understood it. By the time the first coffee was poured across the globe, a constitutional earthquake had already struck. Inside their Montecito home, Prince Harry's phone buzzed with urgent calls from UK Council. His first reaction, according to palace insiders, was disbelief. Surely it was a mistake, a malicious hack, a rumor too absurd to contemplate. But as the legal confirmations arrived, corroborating the findings of 3 independent, court-authorized DNA laboratories, reality became undeniable. "Impossible, insane," Harry whispered, repeating the words like a mantra, trying to force the impossible to bend. It wouldn't. Biology doesn't negotiate with hope, and neither does the law. In that moment, the room shifted from ordinary morning calm to a private hellscape. This wasn't a media-driven scandal or gossip-worthy rumor, it was constitutional law in action. British succession rules are explicit. Only biological descendants of the royal line qualify for succession. This statement, now public in palatial corridors, wasn't about feelings, legacy, or public perception. It was about legality and protocol. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor had been publicly positioned as 6th in line to the British throne, yet legally, biologically, he was not. The ramifications were immediate. Every record, every ceremonial inclusion, every official mention suddenly required scrutiny. What began as a paper trail of minor administrative anomalies, birth certificates, hospital logs, procedural inconsistencies, had escalated into a matter that touched not just family but national law. Sources close to the Sussex Circle say that by 10:23 p.m., Harry had barely processed the initial shock before physical collapse overtook him. Witnesses recount a man who, despite years of military service and life-threatening experiences, could not stand under the sudden weight of truth. Shallow, erratic breathing, fractured speech, and a sense of vertigo overtook him. It was not theatrical, it was a physiological response to grief and cognitive dissonance colliding at full speed. Meghan Markle was there, but her response could not have contrasted more sharply. Strategic, composed, laser-focused on immediate steps, privacy safeguards, legal counsel, medical access, she projected control while Harry spiraled in disbelief. And yet, while Meghan focused outward, Harry's focus collapsed inward. He repeated one phrase over and over, almost as if chanting against the universe. "I am his father. I held him. I raised him." Not denial of science, denial of the disintegration of identity, of purpose, of the emotional architecture he had built around fatherhood. Emergency services were called, and by 11 p.m., paramedics arrived to find a man unmoored, not angry, not argumentative, but in the grip of a psychological collapse with potential cardiac involvement. Transported to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, Harry clung to the only certainty left: his love, his care, his truth. Inside the sterile corridors of Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, Harry's world continued to fracture even as doctors stabilized him. The man who had faced life-threatening combat missions now confronted a personal battlefield far more terrifying: the complete unraveling of the life he had taken for granted. His repeated mantra, "I am his father," echoed in the otherwise calm hospital room, a rhythm of grief, denial, and desperation.
Medical staff later described him as hyperventilating, disoriented, and almost catatonic at times, struggling to reconcile the child he had nurtured with the biological reality that had just been delivered. Meghan Markle, however, remained a pillar of icy precision. She immediately began managing information flow, contacting lawyers, PR consultants, and palace officials, ensuring that the situation could not spiral beyond the confines of legal and strategic control. The contrast could not have been starker, one partner undone by emotion, the other orchestrating the response like a seasoned general. But what prompted this seismic revelation? Sources indicate that the story did not begin with suspicion or gossip. It began in the dusty halls of bureaucracy and legal protocol. In April 2025, Buckingham Palace initiated a routine review of succession records, an administrative procedure meant to catch clerical errors and confirm accuracy became the catalyst for upheaval when minor discrepancies began surfacing in Archie's birth documentation. Small inconsistencies, dates, hospital names, procedural notes, were initially dismissed as minor, the sort of things royal clerks notice daily. But a critical inconsistency emerged. Archie's birth certificate listed Portland Hospital as the location of his delivery, yet hospital records showed no admission for Meghan Markle during that period. The anomaly triggered further investigation. The investigation intensified when, in June, palace legal teams received an anonymous tip through a secure channel. The tip, coming from a former employee of a Los Angeles fertility clinic, was precise, detailed, and legally actionable. It alleged that Meghan and Harry had utilized donor sperm to conceive Archie, citing specific dates, clinic names, and procedural accounts. The palace could no longer treat the information as rumor. Legal obligation required verification. They obtained court-authorized access to medical records and IVF documentation, confirming that while multiple cycles had been attempted with Harry's genetic material, the successful embryo that became Archie had been created using donor sperm. A single detail emerged as the fault line of this entire saga: consent forms. While Meghan's signature appeared on the required documents, Harry's name was absent, replaced with a handwritten note referencing verbal consent due to travel. This omission, seemingly minor, became the epicenter of constitutional concern. Under British succession law, if a child is not biologically descended from the royal line, they cannot hold a place in the line of succession, regardless of parental role or public perception. What had been assumed as a private family matter suddenly escalated into a legal and constitutional emergency. The palace moved swiftly, coordinating with courts in both the UK and US. DNA samples were collected discreetly during a routine pediatric visit, sent to 3 independent accredited laboratories, 2 in the United States and 1 in Switzerland. Chain of custody protocols were meticulously followed to eliminate any question of authenticity. Results were unanimous. No biological connection existed. Harry was not the genetic father of the child he had raised, the child publicly listed as 6th in line to the British throne. Within hours, palace officials convened, lawyers debated, and King Charles III demanded answers. The question at the center of it all: what did Harry know and when?
As the gravity of the DNA results settled in, the palace was forced to confront uncomfortable legal and constitutional realities. Succession law in the United Kingdom is rigid, rooted in centuries of precedent, and not subject to emotional considerations. A child's place in the line of succession is determined solely by biological descent from the royal bloodline. This meant that Archie, previously assumed to be 6th in line, was legally ineligible. Parliament was briefed immediately, emergency discussions convened, and legal scholars weighed in on options that could prevent any future disputes. This wasn't about punishing Harry or Meghan, it was about protecting the integrity of the monarchy and ensuring that no loopholes could compromise the line of succession. Every step had to be precise, legally airtight, and irreversible.
For Harry, the revelation was existential. His identity, carefully constructed around family, duty, and loyalty, now felt stripped away. Friends reported that he alternated between disbelief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The man who had left his royal life, relinquished titles, and uprooted his family in the name of love, now confronted the possibility that the narrative he had clung to for years was fundamentally flawed. Psychologists later described his reaction as identity trauma, the collapse of an entire personal framework in the span of hours. In contrast, Meghan Markle remained outwardly composed, focusing on strategy, legal counsel, and controlling the narrative. Her calm, deliberate approach highlighted the stark divide between emotional devastation and strategic crisis management. Behind palace walls, discussions turned urgent. How could this information be handled without causing a public constitutional crisis? How could the monarchy maintain credibility while navigating what was now effectively a high-stakes legal and media storm? Advisors debated carefully. Public denial or silence were both fraught with risk. Silence could be interpreted as concealment or weakness, while disclosure risked igniting a media frenzy that could spiral out of control. The decision was made to proceed cautiously, verifying every detail, ensuring legal compliance, and preparing for potential fallout on both sides of the Atlantic. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Harry struggled with the practical implications of the revelation. Calls to British lawyers were frequent, legal teams provided step-by-step guidance, and communications with Meghan's representatives were continuous. Every conversation, every decision carried weight. What made this even more complex was the intertwining of personal, legal, and constitutional elements. Harry wasn't just facing a personal loss, he was facing a public reckoning that could redefine his role, his family, and his legacy. This wasn't hypothetical, it was immediate, tangible, and irreversible. Beyond the immediate emotional turmoil, the investigation also highlighted the intricate and often opaque world of assisted reproductive technology, IVF protocols, and medical documentation. Court-authorized staff meticulously reviewed every record, cross-referenced consent forms, and verified procedural notes to ensure that the conclusions were irrefutable. The absence of Harry's signature on the donor consent form became the pivotal detail that triggered legal action, emphasizing the intersection of family decisions and constitutional law. This meticulous investigation demonstrated the lengths to which the palace would go to safeguard the institution and maintain legal integrity, even when personal heartbreak was involved. As the palace investigation deepened, the focus shifted to the question of intent and knowledge. Did Harry know about the use of donor sperm? Was he misled, or did he consent verbally and informally? Evidence remained conflicted. Some friends reported that Harry had been vaguely told about fertility interventions, but did not grasp the full implications. Medical records confirmed multiple IVF cycles, attempts with his own samples, and ultimately the use of donor sperm. The blank line on the consent form, left for Harry's signature, became the symbol of ambiguity, a legal fault line separating belief from fact. Lawyers emphasized that verbal consent or assumption held no weight in constitutional law. This meant that, regardless of intent, the line of succession could not recognize Archie as a royal heir. Public perception added another layer of pressure. The media storm began forming even before an official statement. Rumors, leaks, and speculations circulated online, with every outlet framing the story in increasingly dramatic terms. Social media exploded with divided reactions, some expressing deep sympathy for Harry, others questioning the transparency and integrity of the Sussex narrative. For the palace, controlling the narrative became as important as handling the legal ramifications. Every public word had to align with succession law, maintain credibility, and avoid further constitutional complications. Advisors coordinated carefully, balancing media management with the reality of a family crisis that could no longer remain private. Inside the Montecito home, Harry's psychological state remained fragile. Friends described long periods of isolation, moments of hyperventilation, and repeated affirmations to himself. "I am his father. I raised him. I loved him." Grief, disbelief, and a profound sense of betrayal collided, leaving him emotionally paralyzed. Megan's demeanor contrasted sharply. She remained hyper-focused on strategy, legal counsel, and damage control. Witnesses noted that she coordinated with lawyers, monitored media coverage, and drafted potential statements with precision. The contrast framed the unfolding story, one partner in shock and mourning, the other in calculated control. This dynamic, experts observed, would define how the couple navigated the fallout publicly and privately. Legal scholars outside the palace weighed in, highlighting the unprecedented nature of the case. No recent precedent matched a scenario where a public figure was suddenly revealed not to be the biological parent of a child recognized as a royal heir. Questions of fraud, disclosure, and constitutional liability were raised, though officials emphasized the investigation was procedural rather than accusatory. Buckingham Palace and the Crown's legal team focused on ensuring that all actions adhered strictly to law, avoiding any appearance of favoritism or bias. The goal was clear: safeguard the monarchy while managing the human element with discretion. Meanwhile, the ripple effects reached international observers. Constitutional lawyers in the United States noted that California law recognized Harry as Archie's legal father, but this status was irrelevant under British succession rules. The legal duality highlighted the complex intersection of international law, family law, and monarchy-specific statutes. Scholars debated the implications, noting that the case could set precedent for future scrutiny of royal births involving assisted reproductive technology. This investigation was more than a personal tragedy. It was a constitutional and legal case study exposing vulnerabilities in centuries-old systems when modern fertility practices intersect with historical laws.
As September's DNA results were finalized, the palace faced a decision of timing, communication, and precedent. Officials knew that leaking information prematurely could trigger global media frenzy, legal complications, and public backlash. Every word of the upcoming statement had to be carefully crafted to balance legality, transparency, and constitutional necessity. Advisors worked around the clock, consulting with British and American lawyers, succession experts, and PR strategists. The palace's message had to be succinct, factual, and immune to misinterpretation. Prince Harry was not the biological father of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. Nothing more, nothing less. For Harry, the confirmation was devastating. Friends recalled moments when he sat silently in his Montecito residence, gripping Archie's toys, staring at photos on the wall. The cognitive dissonance between love and biological reality became unbearable. He repeated the mantra, "I am his father. I raised him. I loved him." Even medical professionals who visited described a man physically and emotionally drained, struggling to reconcile identity with the immutable science. Psychologists explained that the trauma Harry experienced was unique. It was not only personal grief, but also a public, historical crisis. The world was watching, and he was simultaneously a father, a public figure, and a royal descendant, all roles colliding under extreme scrutiny. Meghan's role in the unfolding drama remained complex and enigmatic. Witnesses emphasized her strategic calm, drafting statements, consulting legal teams, and monitoring media coverage. Her actions demonstrated a focus on controlling narrative and protecting personal interests, regardless of emotional resonance. Contrast framed perception. Harry spiraled under the weight of biology. Meghan navigated logistics and messaging. Observers debated whether this disparity reflected calculation, survival instincts, or a protective mechanism against public scrutiny.
Regardless, it positioned Meghan as the operational pivot in the crisis, influencing how both she and Harry engaged with the inevitable public fallout. International attention quickly shifted to constitutional implications. Experts confirmed that under the Act of Settlement, succession is determined solely by bloodline. Archie's removal from the line of succession was immediate and non-negotiable. Parliamentary advisors reviewed the situation, assessing historical precedent and ensuring that legal measures were executed flawlessly. Constitutional scholars noted the delicate balance. While Harry remained legally Archie's father under California law, the monarchy's legitimacy and the integrity of succession could not accommodate ambiguity. This decision reinforced the principle that the crown prioritizes law and lineage above personal circumstance. As news leaked, public opinion fractured further. Social media erupted with speculation, sympathy, and outrage. Commentators debated whether Harry had been deceived, whether Meghan had withheld information intentionally, or whether systemic failures allowed the discrepancy to go unnoticed for years. The palace, maintaining silence, allowed the legal process to define the narrative rather than media narratives. Behind closed doors, strategies focused on risk mitigation, ensuring that every step complied with constitutional law while protecting the monarchy's global reputation. By the end of the day, the story crystallized into a cautionary tale. Even the highest-profile lives are vulnerable to hidden truths. DNA and law superseded love, trust, and narrative. Harry confronted the impossible reality that fatherhood, identity, and public expectation could be simultaneously affirmed and denied. Meghan maintained control over information flow, orchestrating messaging amid chaos. Buckingham Palace executed legal protocol with surgical precision, demonstrating that while emotion might be messy and human, constitutional process remains unyielding. This episode redefined the stakes for the monarchy, personal relationships, and the enduring impact of secrets long buried. The shockwaves would reverberate far beyond Montecito, leaving history, law, and legacy forever altered.